Welcome to the Whose Body Is It podcast. I'm your host, Isabella Malvin. For those who don't know me, I'm a birth worker, a life coach, hypnotist, and a former liberal feminist turned radical truth teller. On this podcast, I expose the forces at play attempting to control our minds and bodies, such as transgender ideology, pornography, prostitution, and so much more. Together, we'll untangle patriarchal lies as you listen to jaw-dropping interviews with women from around the world. Warning, while listening to this podcast, you might find yourself triggered or perhaps notice where you've been biting your tongue on the issues that matter most to you. In my coaching and hypnosis, I help women and men stop getting triggered by every single thing, cultivate resilience, stop unwanted behaviors, and increase self-confidence. You can book your first session at whosebodyisit.com, and you can find that link in the episode show notes. And I just want to say that it's because of your endless support that I'm able to interview amazing women, get their stories out, and produce regular episodes for you. So with that being said, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if you're listening in, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And also consider making a financial contribution via the link in my show notes. You can also visit my activist sticker shop. My pro-woman stickers have the power to intercept transhumanist programming. So take a photo of your stickers out in the wild and tag me on Instagram at Whose Body Is It. Without further ado, let's get into this week's story. Today, I speak with Leigh Janet Marshall, a biologist and formerly trans-identified woman from the Bay Area. Early exposure to pornography shaped Leigh's understanding of what a woman is and convinced her she was better off as a gay man. Conceived by artificial insemination, Leigh met her father at age 18 and then connected with one of her biological sisters, also donor conceived, who was also struggling with alienation from her female body. With Leigh's constellation of early abandonment wounding and female socialization, she coped by becoming anorexic and later bulimic. In an effort to find authenticity, Leigh and her sister committed to transitioning together, but this was not the cure for her despair that she thought it would be. Leigh now recognizes transition as soft suicide, yet another form of self-harm she used to express the shame of being female. Leigh woke up to the fact that she was targeted for medicalization, but not before pursuing sterilization at age 29. Leigh sees gender-affirming care for youth as blunt a tool for population control as China's one-child policy. Leigh connects many dots of the transhumanist agenda, from reproductive technology to pornography, trans ideology, and artificial intelligence. She also shines light on how trans ideology is a gateway for population control and the personification of machines. This is truly one of my favorite episodes to date, so much so that I speak very little in this episode, as I was truly speechless. Leigh, so before we get into your story and everything we're going to talk about, I just want to share with my audience that you were, we've never spoken before. This is our first interview. However, you were referenced in an interview that I did with a woman, your friend named Ray. And in that episode, for everyone who remembers my episode with Ray, a formerly trans-identified woman, she had mentioned a friend that had piqued her and had encouraged her to really think about a lifelong dependence on the medication that she was taking. And that friend is you. Yeah. And so I'm really excited to hear more about your story. So take us to your pre-trans identification and maybe what your life was like growing up as a girl before the introduction to trans ideology.
Oh, thank you. And huge shout out to Ray for her courage and for her love of being alive. And I truly consider her to be my best friend on earth. And I'm so grateful that I had the courage to speak truth to power in that instance, and just to bring her attention to the medical problems that were associated with transition that she was never given informed consent about. So, first of all, for everyone listening, so much empathy needs to be had for people that are going down the path of medicalization, because we really don't know. We don't know until we know. There's an active cover up of this information from healthcare providers due to the medical model. So people who step away from the medicalization trap do so with tremendous courage and intelligence. So shout out to Ray forever. Thanks for being my friend. I think it's a perfect segue into my life as a girl growing up in the Bay Area, where we both came from. There's really no separating our vulnerability to gender ideology from our positionality as women growing up in a coastal elite area. And I want to draw attention to a experience of mine that occurred in early high school. I've been struggling with my understanding of myself as a woman since pretty much I was 6 years old. I experienced a deeply alienating family separation trauma as a 6-year-old, which made me vulnerable to the sense of deep alienation that gender ideology preys upon. In this instance, what had occurred was I grew up with a single mom, and she was the breadwinner of our family. And she herself had struggled with understanding of herself as deficient as a woman, because she was the breadwinner. As a single mom, she was a lawyer and worked a lot. Was still definitely around for me as a kid, but my parental caregivers were a recently immigrated family from China. So I grew up with them from 8 months to 6 years old. And due to citizenship complications, they moved to Canada when I was 6. So all of a sudden, I lost what I thought and truly believed to be my mom and my dad and my sister. And the first fear in me of worthlessness came from not understanding why they didn't take me with them. So I discovered that love didn't conquer all. And I all of a sudden felt this lack of belonging. And from that lack of belonging, I essentially developed a very large fear of abandonment. And that led me to a personality coping style of mimicry to secure love from, in this case, my mom, who was still my mom and therefore still took care of me. So as a young person, I completely pretended to be my mother, who was and is very strong, very outspoken, very quote unquote masculinized under the shallow definition of man and woman as, bold versus timid. She was the one female partner in an all male law firm, a real trailblazer in terms of a woman having a typically male career. And she and I were and are very close. And she shared with me very young her feelings of alienation from her own body because of her personality type and her toughness, her resilience. She also shared with me the reasons why she was a single mom instead of a mom with a partner. And at this point, I think it's important to draw attention to the fact that I myself am a product of what I would call LGBT science. And in this case, my mom, who has identified as bisexual, was not partnered and so chose to go to a sperm clinic in the Castro in San Francisco. I've been told that this sperm clinic was informally called the Lavender Stork Society. And it was a institution that was designed to enable lesbians to have children and sourced from all kinds of men in the area, but in this case, also many gay men who were interested in breeding, but not parenting. So I was produced from this science, and my sperm donor father elected to be known, looked up at 18. You can choose to be either anonymous or disclose your identity to your future adult children, and that's what my father decided to do. It was through him that I ended up realizing that it was primarily lesbian mothers that were pursuing that artificial insemination. And through him, I was able to get to know some of my half siblings through this scientific process. And due to my sense of alienation from my natal family unit, when I got to know my father and I saw that I, in fact, had sisters, biological sisters, through this process, I was able to meet some of my half siblings. And when I met one of my half siblings, all of my feelings of alienation and not being in a cohesive nuclear family I was given a false antidote by seeing my face and my sister's face, by seeing our shared father's face and my sister's face. Fast forward past 18 when we meet each other. By 2016, it's clear that we are both traumatized by being women. We've both experienced various forms of sexual assault. And we essentially made a pact to transition together. And we started out as rejecting our womanhood together by identifying as non-binary and using they them pronouns. And for her, it progressed to medicalization. And for me, the only thing that kept me from pursuing medicalization was the fact that I coped with my anxiety about being alienated as a person with an eating disorder. And so from sophomore year, I started being anorexic. And by college, really exposure to experimentation with drugs and also deepening experiences of sexual assault that and copycatting. My bulimia or my anorexia transformed into bulimia. So by the time we were both non-binary, I was vomiting daily, and I knew that there was something deeply wrong with me. And I knew that I was body dysmorphic before I was ever gender dysphoric. For me, gender dysphoria crept in as a potential antidote explanation for the body dysmorphia. But what's true is that I was alienated from my womanhood by the time I was in elementary school because I was exposed to pornography very young by peers and just having uncontrolled access to the internet. And so I learned very young, by about third grade, that what women were, according to pornography, are orifices to be used for sexual pleasure. And I felt deeply traumatized by that understanding of womanhood. And consequently, I, by middle school, developed a essentially porn addiction. And what was strange about my porn addiction by middle school was that I started believing that I was a gay man trapped in a woman's body. So the pornography that I consumed was gay anime porn, pretty pictures of men that I was actually attracted to, being sexual with each other. And I was attracted to that not only because I'm heterosexual, but because I believed that males being sexual still retain their personhood, whereas women being sexual were animals.
Mm.
So I believed that I had enough of a personality to be a gay man.
Wow.
And when I later met my dad, I used that to reinforce my alienation from my body. And by the time my sister and I made a pact to reject our womanhood together and to pursue this path of being trans, we both, I mean, she explicitly spoke with me about wanting to identify with her father as opposed to identify with her mother, whom she experienced deep neglect and emotional abuse from. So for us, it was a chance to escape the waywardness of what we believed our mothers were, to embody a kind and generous and very warm person whom we met in our father. And so basically, we were confused and traumatized, and we believed that we owed allegiance to the LGBT community and that we were new age humans, that traditional people with their nuclear families and their mothers and fathers, they just didn't know how advanced we were as people of the new age, as products of science, as androgynes. And I no longer speak to my sister. It's here I want to point out that the term dead name normalizes suicide. And it was in 2016 in which we both rejected our names of birth and our identities of birth. And I since have re-embodied myself and come to an understanding that there's been nothing wrong with my body. And the only thing that saved me from that was ironically my eating disorder. And knowing that vomiting every day meant that there was something wrong with my thoughts, not with my body. And I think transition is a soft form of suicide, which is why they use language like dead name. And it's a soft suicide because you kill yourself, you kill the self that you were born into. And then once you transition, you die younger than you ever would have from the health complications: heart attack, stroke, blood clots, cancer. Or if you don't live long enough to experience those side effects, it's likely because you have killed yourself. And you've killed yourself because of the chronic pain and the lack of erotic sensation. And going back to a very stark memory of mine that really pierced me to my core as a young person growing up in the Bay Area. This was freshman year of high school. I saw graffiti. It was a picture of a Glock, a stencil of a Glock. And the text next to it said, "The best thing you can do for the planet is kill yourself." And I believed that. I believed that. And I believed that so much that I pursued my own sterilization. I was sterilized by 29. And I wasn't, in my mind, courageous enough to do the job of killing myself. So instead, I pursued self-harm. And I did so with a explicit intent to punish myself, and to punish myself as a woman with reproductive capacity, as the only functional unit of ecology, a woman capable of carrying on our species. I hated that. And so I took every action I could to prevent myself from being alive. And my form of soft suicide was evolutionary suicide. I got away with that. I'll never have children. And honestly, I the only reason why I don't regret that decision is because I'm so afraid of what children have to grow up with. I'm so afraid that children are being targeted for this sterilization, pedophilia, because to make a child able to consent to sexual reassignment surgery, there's no way that's not going to be a gateway for consent to sex with adults. So to me, I view the policy of pursuing sterilization of young, vulnerable people who the only children of which that may be buffered from this are children with loving, stable nuclear families that are able to insulate their children from this propaganda. It's important to see that the underlying theme here is population control. And gender affirming care for youth is as blunt a tool for population control as China's one child policy. The only difference is individualistic propaganda. So I needed to understand the big picture of what I was being targeted for and what women 1,000 times more frequently than men are being targeted for. I needed to understand why our culture would sign off on this butchery and push these lies that capture people really young and have the potential to devastate their lives. So from that, all I can say with the deepest compassion in my heart is, if you are a woman that hates your body because of what the culture is saying to you about your body, about your worth being reduced to orifices, I'd say hold out, have courage, protect yourself from the fear of yourself that they're sowing. Know that they are trying to control our population with propaganda and resist it. Have children, teach them right, protect them from this propaganda. And that's the only way we can ever get a handle on this, is a continued sense of hope.
I'm just blown away by, firstly, how succinctly you've just told your story. Again, there are many, many more details that could be shared, and I do have questions about, many of the points that you brought up, but it's just, yeah, I'm just kind of in awe of your, I guess, integration perspective, and I'm sure you've seen as well that coming out of this kind of thought policing, there isn't always it isn't always a smooth exit. We know women, like with any abusive relationship or cult, people go in, they come out. Yeah, I'm just struck by your level of articulation and like analysis, and the way you've kind of woven the story of your life and made those connections, and something that, I've interviewed adoptees who were who have that like primal wound that you're alluding to, with that disconnection. In your case, you were connected to your biological mother. You were raised with your biological mother present and as you stated, you were a product of science. And that is, as Jennifer Law's work, really covers, it's really unusual for us to hear from, well, what do the kids think now that they are adults? What do they have to say? Shouldn't we maybe consider that? I find it fascinating that that you pursued a career as a biologist. I mean, can you say more about what that's been like through the rewriting of male and female? And maybe were you like in that career path before, kind of like throughout this process? Was that like kind of through college, immediately after college? Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, it took a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance to learn about sexual dimorphism and then uh, reject it. I think this is where lack of informed consent comes in with medicalization, because for me, I knew I had a woman's body the whole time. In college, I switched my major, seems like a dozen times within the first 2 years, because really I really loved visual art. I was always drawn to the creative aspects of visual art. I really learned to play with the idea of queerness as a young person through art and through being involved with online art communities. For as wonderful as creativity is, there is a true navel gazy aspect of devoting yourself to, again, I look at it again as a form of mimicry. In this case, I was mimicking images that I could use to piece together a sense of self.
Mm.
So by the time I was in high school, I was so dysmorphic that my self-soothing was self-portraiture. So I could only understand myself as a real being by making these artistic renderings of myself, which in one aspect was expansive and in another aspect uh, limiting and damaging and destabilizing. When I first dealt with anorexia, the totem that I chose for myself to escape this desire to disappear entirely, to starve myself out of existence, I chose the symbol of a lion. And I chose that because I very distinctly created this character, a female lion with a lion's mane, because I felt so, again, alienated from my womanhood that I knew that I was a lioness. I knew that I was female, but I portrayed myself with masculine features, with a mane. I portrayed myself as an animal because to be a human woman was too unforgivable, was too small, was too vulnerable. And what happened when I was anorexic, I was formerly overweight and I lost 70 pounds in a year. And what baffled me was the change in perception of my body when I went from being overweight to underweight, and the attention that sexualized my body once I was in my proper form, like what I was, born as before I pursued binge eating as a eating disorder that hid my body under layers of fat. That devastated me. It devastated me that I was all of a sudden a sexual object to people because now I read as a woman. And this will segue into biology because these are all the reasons why I abandoned art for science, but I was also vulnerable to an identity crisis when I did turn my eyes towards science and away from myself. And unfortunately, my my transition in the middle of college from the humanities to the sciences also coincided with a deep self-loathing for ever needing to indulge in art to begin with. And it also coincided with sexual assault in college. It coincided with the sexual assault of a family member um, when I was 18, 19, when I was 19. So while I essentially abandoned this fantasy land in which I could safely construct myself, my pursuing science exposed me to the dark reality of sexual dimorphism, which is that men are powerful and men unchecked will pursue mating access doggedly, especially when they're encouraged by other males to do so. And I went to UC Santa Cruz for undergrad. And the University of California system is very liberal, very postmodern, not in the sciences per se, but the general context, the social context, was all about experimentation with drugs, experimentation with risky sex. Hookup culture was a really pushed down my throat and damaged me deeply. And so becoming a biologist hardened me in more ways than one, not all of which were good. So I actually took a year off and almost dropped out of college, even though I was, had a merit scholarship, was getting straight A's, was really beloved by my professors, an achiever. I really was a notable achiever, which was also alienating to me as a woman because I was confident. I asked questions in class. I talked to professors afterwards. I had this sense of self that seemed too mighty for my sex. And so, as a result of I'd say both that what I was talking about earlier, how I pursued self harm to punish myself for being a woman, that exposed me to sexual assault. And so I took a year off after junior year because of a sexual assault that I experienced in junior year. And I was beginning to see myself slip away further than I had ever before. One of the things that both my sister and myself leaned into deeply was psychedelics. Psychedelics was a magical escape from the brutal reality of being alive, which the sciences truly hammer home. When you learn about biology and you learn about mating systems and you learn about mammals, all you see is violence and all you see is sexual violence. And I mean, down to adorable little sea otters that you view in the bay. I learned in college from an ecology professor that male sea otters will gang rape a female to death and continue raping her dead body. And the scientific explanation of this is purely levels of testosterone. Levels of testosterone selected for only because of the vastness of the ocean as a ecosystem in which mates are to find each other. So male sea otters are extremely sexually aggressive because they are driven to seek out females throughout the vastness of the ocean. So when you learn about sexuality and mating systems in science, you have to separate it from human morality. And so while I was learning about the science of life, I was also learning about moral relativism. That was the greater postmodern context in which I was learning scientific fact. So combined, I believed that to be male was to be a rapist, and to be female was to be the raped. And there was no escape from that under moral relativism, because all of a sudden, rape is empowering. You can make rape empowering as a woman. You can make being trafficked and used for your capacity to breed and to have your orifices provide males with pleasure. That's empowering. And then men in turn are, it was easy for me to frame to be a man as the ultimate escape from the cycle of rape. And quite frankly, my sister and I were traumatized, like I said, by sexual assault and by being these odd women out as women in the sciences, her engineering, myself, biology and ecology. So with the help of psychedelics and also with the help of being subsumed by the trauma Olympics in the form of slam poetry, we were able to reconstruct ourselves magically. And our get out of jail free card for our understanding of science was purely to say that, oh, well, we're not talking about sex. We're talking about gender. Gender is a social construct. Gender is not sex. we can be of the female sex and have a gender of androgyne. And to this day, one of the most alarming spiritual experiences I've ever had was at a slam poetry event. I shared a poem in which I I was basically pursued socially by Christians at this time because they were deeply concerned about my aura of misery and
Wow.
self-hatred. So I wrote a poem in which I ended this poem asking, "Who is holy, holy, holy?" Those three words, HOLY, in a string together is in the Bible. And my sister comes up to me after I share this very powerful spiritual poem that rocked the room because of its sincerity. And my sister comes up to me and she love bombs me in a way that she had never done before, in a way that I was both so happy to experience, but also confused to experience because it was physical affection on the verge of emotional incest. And she told me, she yelled at the end of the poem, she yelled, "Whole Lee," that who I was searching for in the depths of my despair was my whole self, my whole secular self. And after that love bombing, I went into the bathroom. And by this time, I was completely sober. And I looked in the mirror and I saw my face turn into a man's face. And that terrified me and confused me and also excited me and enticed me because this man I saw in the mirror was so beautiful, was what I thought maybe could be my authentic self, trying to escape from my mortal coil. And what I will say is, I couldn't have saved my own life without really discovering the nature of my existence spiritually. And seeing my face turn into a man's face in the mirror triggered a practice of looking at myself in the eyes and really meditating on my body. And never, ever again did I see my face turn into a man's face. And instead, to this day, when I look at myself in the eyes in the mirror intently, I turn gold, but it's me. It's my face that turns gold. It's my soul that shines through. And I see my hallucination as an act of trickery. And with a, Abrahamic understanding of said trickery, I'd call it purely satanic. That deception. And that deception is what my sister pursued totally. And that is why we are estranged now. When she was who I loved the most, I really, I really believed in us. I believed that we were family. But the truth is that we weren't. We were just blood. And that broke me. But it shattered illusions too. And so back to how I understand myself as a biologist, I no longer accept the postmodern definition of gender as a separate entity from sex. And I see that propaganda as a pursuit of pushing disembodiment. And I know that the disembodiment is a policy being pursued not only for population control, but also to usher in an era of embodied AI where we no longer have to recognize humans and souls as connected inextricably from our embodied existence. No. Now that we've separated gender from sex, we can separate soul from body. And with this Cartesian dualism, we can accept that computer programs are people and then accept them as our overlords. And in 2014, Martin Rothblatt, a biological male, CEO of Sirius XM Radio, was labeled the richest woman CEO of the year. And it was 2015, after this landmark event, that gender ideology really took off. And Martin Rothblatt, Martin himself, has written a manifesto called From Transgender to Transhuman. And it is explicitly stated that the goal of popularizing transgenderism and the goal of changing the laws with respect to sex and bodies and self-ID, all these laws are a gateway for the legal personification of machines. And I know from the fact that I was captured by degrowth propaganda in the form of the best thing you can do for the planet is kill yourself, that what they're training, especially women in coastal cities, is to pursue uselessness, which makes people vulnerable to prostitution, specifically to the sex trade, because when you are useless and produce no labor, you are reduced to your orifices, especially as a woman. So I think that the authentic self, all of the trans propaganda is a smokescreen for controlling the population of the working class, training the working class to defang itself by pursuing uselessness, and to usher in an age of technocratic fascism, which is already very well established and, in my view, looks almost impossible to derail unless there are mass movements of working class people fighting against their pursuit of being run by AI. And the Bay Area is an early adopter of AI. San Francisco has just rolled out its first, RoboCops with a moratorium on lethal force.
Oh, God.
The Silicon Valley, who is a staple of technocracy, you can see that there's almost bipartisan support in the United States for keeping Silicon Valley pursuing its aims of making us useless. And as a biologist who works both in real life and in computer-based settings, I know that my field is an early adopter of AI. I know that my field is pushing the agenda of ESG, environmental, social governance, and that this whole hog pursuit of social credit scoring, of corporations first and then citizens next, is a perfect storm for realizing the Malthusian vision of degrowth. And that vision is to get us to abandon our pursuit of human dignity and human dignity through work, through the building of wealth. And it wants to replace that with a disembodied fantasy addiction that is being pushed by such programs as the metaverse, by social media. And so I think we need to fight hard now before it's too late. And I think we need to fight hard now and treat our fight as a possibility that we are too late, and that the powers, BlackRock and Vanguard, these are mercenaries holding the whole world hostage, holding the nature of humanity itself hostage. And I know for a fact that humans do flourish under circumstances of annihilation because we love being alive, because there's nothing more meaningful than our fight to live. So I pray every day that people fight for the truth, and people fight for their neighbor, for their children, for their parents, for everything that it means to be a human being. I pray that we fight lovingly to save our species from annihilation. It's that serious.
Oh, I so appreciate you, Leigh. Wow. This analysis is so, it is everything. Everything else, everything else is distraction.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's what our political system in the United States does best, is pursue dualistic divisions as a smokescreen for the unilateral pursuit of the demise of the working class.
What does your day-to-day look like now? Now that you have come to this information, analysis, conviction, what do your days look like?
This process has emboldened me. I now feel like there's no time to waste. And even though it may be great personal risk to myself, I'm compelled to shout this analysis from the rooftops. And my favorite part of my job is getting to work with productive laborers. And my job on paper is to ensure that productive labor doesn't harm environmental resources. But my goal, my heart, and my passion lies in supporting productive labor, in making sure that every worker I interact with feels respected, feels valued, knows that they are building America, that they are our only hope. And as a result, I have beautiful, life sustaining, transformative conversations with all kinds of people every day. And when I'm not working and I'm not trying to discuss my concerns with people I share space with at that capacity, I keep my sincere friends close. And we speak, like, again, Ray's my best friend. I'm going to go for a hike with her after this. And we're going to talk about our hopes and our fears and our analysis of life, our personal relationships. We're going to have fun with our dogs and we're going to enjoy the sunshine. And people may think that I am uniquely devastated or paranoid or pessimistic about continuing to be alive. And I'm here telling the world that I've never wanted to live more than I do now. I've never had more appreciation for existing more than now, even in this landscape of fear, because I finally have unbridled access to love. I truly bathe in the love of being alive every day. And that doesn't mean that I don't cry. And that doesn't mean that I don't have panic attacks. And that doesn't mean that I don't recoil from people that are pushing lies. But I love them too. I believe in their dignity too. And I feel like for the first time in my life, I am a friend to myself, a true friend to myself, and a true friend to every person I meet. And I will never give up that resplendent understanding of what it means to be alive.
All I have to say is thank you. I don't have anything. You really blown me away in this conversation, and I am so grateful to be connected to you with you now. And yeah, you've really inspired me in this conversation. And yeah, thank you.
Well, that gratitude is 100% mutual because I'm not confident that I would have come to these conclusions without your help, without your voice and your platform and your collaboration with people of integrity and care and your platforming voices that spread the love of humanity. So from the bottom of my heart, your work saves lives. Your work saved my life. So I'm very happy to share my story with you and to fill your cup back in turn.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or family member who needs to hear this content. And if you do share it on social media, don't forget to follow and tag me at Whose Body Is It? So until next time.